Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Vosika, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today we talk to writer and magician Bob Miller.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews. So I think we're ready to go then.
All right.
Are you ready to go? Yes. All right, we're ready to go.
Here we are back at Books and Brews for July.
Episode, what is this now?
I believe it's episode number 3.
Episode 3.
Bob Miller, yes. Yes, after our start at AM 950 and our foray into Barnes & Noble, here we are with the podcast. Number 3, and looking forward to hundreds more, right?
Yes. How's your month been?
My month has been crazy busy, and in fact, it just so happens our guest today was part of that. I ended up going out to Oregon, and did I pronounce it as they do? I messed it up again.
I think they said Oregon.
Oregon. I cannot get myself to say Oregon.
That's like, so I grew up in St. Louis, and everybody from outside of Missouri says Missouri, but I don't know anybody in Missouri who says Missouri.
Oh, I say Missouri.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, it's Missouri. It's like, no, it really isn't.
In Missouri, they say Missouri.
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody I know, anyway. Everybody that I grew up around said Missouri.
Yeah, or Louisville.
Well, that's right.
Louisville. See, I would say Louisville, but yeah. I guess I'd be wrong. And then there was Scotland where I said Jedburgh. And the Scots could not find it in themselves to politely correct me.
I like the sound of Jedburgh. Jedburgh. It has a ring to it.
Yeah, no, they laughed and said it's Jedburgh, and I thought, well, considering it's Edinburgh, that should be obvious. Which actually kind of has to do with the trip we made to Oregon. Mm-hmm. It had to do with these books written about Smailholm Tower in Scotland, and they were children's books. It was called In the Keep of Time. And this was my favorite book, and through a whole series of events, I found out that the author, Margaret J. Anderson, is live and well and had her own website. And so 3 years ago, I ended up contacting her. And about a month ago, I thought, what's the worst she can do if I just ask, what if I were out in Oregon? Could we... See, there I go again. Could we get together for a cup of coffee? And, I didn't want to say I'm going to drive all this way. I didn't want to pressure her or anything, but she's pretty sharp. She figured it out. And she invited me to her home for lunch. And so Bob offered to help with the driving, so we jumped in the car. We drove 24 hours straight. Mm-hmm. Put some sleeping bags and pillows in the back, and we just switched off sleeping, driving.
Nice.
And it was a great visit. She is just a wonderful person, and so she gave me 6 of her books. She has quite a few, including a number of nonfiction about insects and about famous scientists, great scientists in history. Turns out she was trained as a geneticist back in, what would it be, the 40s? I think the 40s or 50s. Right. And her husband was a professor of entomology.
Wow.
So, yeah, fascinating story. And we had a fantastic visit. We had lunch grown in her garden. She showed us around her 5 acres. And I told her I want to be her when I grow up. So, yeah, I read her books. In the Keep of Time, Searching for Shona, From a Place Far Away is her autobiography, and a couple of other books, too, that she gave me. All wonderful stories. What about you?
I am full in the swing of rehearsals with my theater company. For those who don't know, I don't just do beer. My main gig is running a theater company. We tour to college campuses all over the country. And every summer, I spend a lot of the summer rehearsing, training in new actors, which is what I'm in the process of doing now. So that keeps me pretty busy.
So when do you take off?
August 16th is the start of our big main tour.
And 3 weeks.
Three-ish weeks of insanity.
Yes.
Different city every day. 1, 2, 3 shows a day.
Wow.
It gets pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Driving, flying, long drives.
So you can take a hint from our road trip.
Yes. And otherwise,
back to
I'm
go.
trying to work in my garden. Funny, it's been so
How's it
cold all
growing?
spring.
Right. There
Things-
was a spring?
There wasn't really.
I missed it.
Things haven't been growing. You know, I put tomatoes and stuff in the ground, and they've been in the ground for a month or so, and they still look exactly as they did.
Yeah. That's my clock.
Oh, wow.
I'm a
Suddenly have
musician.
a waltz playing.
Well, that's because I thought you might want to waltz.
Yeah.
I'm thinking ahead.
But the tomato plants are still, they look almost exactly like they did when I put them in the ground, because it hasn't, they need heat. But I went away this past weekend. I was gone for 3 days, and I come back, and it's like, boom! Everything is like
finally, good.
shot up
Good.
in those 3 days.
Yeah.
I was amazed when I got home.
Well, my kids took off to camp and told me it would be nice if someone put the seeds in the ground while they're gone. And it's pretty much rained since then. So yeah, my garden hasn't really changed much this spring either. We got the weeding done. That's about it. We're behind. So anyway, let's welcome.
Well, first, what you been reading?
Well, I told you what I've been reading in the Keep of Time. So
Oh.
that went over your head.
It did. I missed your read of the month. I totally...
My read of the month was all of Margaret Anderson's books.
All right, that's a lot of books.
And, well, they're children's books, and so they're children's chapter novels, but, you know, they're really good stories. They're all, in some way or other, about meeting people across time. So one is about a girl who runs into the woods to these old, dilapidated cabins, and sometimes when she gets there, they're brand new again. And there is a girl there from a family with 6 children, and they end up basically becoming one person. It's a fascinating story.
Wow.
And so this 11, 12-year-old girl who is an only child ends up being part of this big family full of kids, and she really ends up finding a lot to love in that family. Even though they're very poor, she sees how they interact with each other and the love they have for each other. And it's an interesting story, though, when the girl from the past, Anne, seems to start showing up at her home and pursuing her. So, and there's a rather sad twist at the end to it. And the Keep of Time is about these children who go into the medieval tower and come out in the wrong century. And so, it kind of had a lot to do with my book.
I was going to say, it's
The
kind of fit in with your...
Chronicles.
with your books.
Yeah. See where I got that idea?
So my read, I went back to my rediscovered favorite writer, Italo Calvino, and read another one of his. I think in episode 1 I talked about one of his books.
Okay, was that the one?
That was the
where
one with
it's
the multiple novels. Yeah.
I still want to read that.
So this is another one. His books are really kind of fantastic, fantasy-like stories. And this one is called Baron in the Trees. And it takes place in like the 1700s, and this the son of a baronial family gets pissed off when he's chided at dinner by his
when he's what?
Chided.
Oh, chided. That's a good old-fashioned word. I should chide my children.
And tells his parents that he is going to spend the rest of his life in the trees. And he does, and from up there he commands armies, and
fascinating!
It's really a fun story.
You've sold me on this author. I need to.
He is
I need to get
phenomenal.
His books. You should spell his name or put it in
Calvino, Calvino.
Okay, and the last name?
That's his last
that
name.
is. What's the first name?
Italo. Italo.
Okay, interesting.
I think I'm pronouncing that right. I could have it completely wrong.
Well, we have with us today a magician.
Yes.
And an author. Bob Miller was a professional musician for 20 years. Performing. Magician, isn't that what I said?
No, I'm sorry.
What did I say?
Musician, as a musician would say.
Okay, my kids, when they were little, always called me a musician, and so when I kind of been hanging out with your magician friends this past week, I've had a really hard time separating those words. It's the weirdest thing. I'm sorry. Bob Miller was a professional magician for 20 years, performing on stage and performing tableside magic. He's also created several of his own tricks. I think we're going to see at least one today, probably two, which he sells on his website, www.bobmillermagic.com. In addition to magic, Bob works as a programmer. He has created software for magicians to track customers and shows, and software for writers based on K.M. Weiland's workbook outlining your novel. Mm-hmm. As if that's not enough, Bob is now writing a 5-book thriller series, Chrysalis Chronology. This series is about genetically altered humans with special powers. Mm-hmm. So far, The Smart Kid and The Time Leaper are available.
Yes.
So welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. So the way we like to do this, we like to just leap into the first reading to get us started.
Okay.
And I introduce the first beer to get us started because I'm taking the readings that you're going to do and looking for conceptual themes and whatnot and pairing beers to the words, to your work.
That'll be a first for me.
So the beer that I chose for this first piece is from Brewing in Brooklyn, New York, and it is called Black Ops.
Good name.
It is an 11% Imperial Stout aged in bourbon barrels. I chose it for a couple of reasons. The main image, as I read through this piece, the main imagery that stuck with me was darkness, like running through this, being trapped in this dark room and then running through this dark tunnel. Just blackness, not being able to see. So I was looking for a deep black beer, which an Imperial Stout is a deep black beer.
Looks like it.
And then the other thing that appealed to me about this particular Imperial Stout, because there are a lot of Imperial Stouts out there, is the name, Black Ops. Because the protagonist of your story is being chased by some mysterious agents.
Yes, by some bad government agents.
Yes, which the Black Ops.
Great. That's appropriate.
Having read the whole book, I think it's a great choice.
Can we taste this?
Yep, and we're starting with...
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. What do you think, Bob?
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I've never tasted beer like this before.
Big, rich, roasty. The bourbon barrel really comes through. You get some caramel, vanilla, kind of alcohol.
What, in beer?
Yeah.
That's part of beer.
But you taste it in this. I mean, most beers you don't taste the alcohol. This you feel and taste the presence of alcohol.
I like this, and I think when we started doing this, you were lucky if I liked 1 out of 10 beers you picked. Now I'm liking 1 out of 3.
Yeah,
so
you might like 2 today. I think you might like 2.
Wow.
You know what? And I was even debating whether to say I like 1 or 2 out of 3. You're converting me slowly but surely.
All right, so go ahead.
This is from The Smart Kid, first chapter. They attacked in late May, during his Phi Ed class at Lincoln Middle School beside the Arkansas River. Tom Howardson felt fresh and energized, ready to begin the workout. He enjoyed Phi Ed. It was the one class where he didn't pretend. He couldn't. His body, slightly larger than the other 6th grade boys, was solid and muscular. His muscled legs were visible below his gym shorts, but his loose-fitting t-shirt, with the bright lettering of the Beatles, hid the contoured muscles of his chest. It secretly amused him to show off his strength, especially on the ropes challenge. Tom and another boy faced the 2 ropes and waited for Mr. Metcalf to blow the whistle. He clambered up the rope without using his legs. The other 6th graders watched with open-mouthed amazement at his easy climb and cheered when he reached the top. Tom, the victor, looked at the student below struggling to get to the halfway mark. Shazam! From his vantage point, he saw the assistant principal and the 2 government agents enter the far side of the gym. Instantly, Tom knew who they were. They paused by the door, and the assistant principal motioned for Mr. Metcalf to join them. During their temporary distraction, Tom plunged down the rope, burning his hands red. He had 3 choices, the 2 gym exits or the locker room exit. Without saying a word, he hustled to the nearest door into the locker room. As the door closed, he looked back. An agent pointed in his direction and yelled, "Stop!" Tom ran through the locker room, set on escaping through the exit into the school hallway. He jumped past two boys huddled in conversation. He nearly collided with another who had abruptly bent forward to tie his sneakers. A last-second dodge, and Tom banged against the lockers as he passed the surprised boy. He slammed against the exit door's push bar with his full weight and came to a dead stop. He groaned in pain as his shoulder took most of the force. For the first time, the exit was locked. He ignored his aching shoulder and stinging hands and scanned for an escape route. The only other door led to the pool, which would be unused at that time of the day. In the gym and the locker room, students and staff had been present, limiting the agent's public actions, but an empty pool area would be a perfect place to forcefully abduct him again. What waits behind this door? He ran to Metcalf's open office and grabbed the desk chair. It had a high metal back and, most importantly, wheels. He pushed it through the locker room toward the ramp leading to the pool door. His palms on the seat, the back of the chair forward like a shield, he crouched and forced it down the ramp with increasing speed and banged open the door. They were waiting for him. A muffled shot echoed as the tranquilizer dart ricocheted off the back of the chair. Tom shoved the chair toward a surprised agent who had no time to react before it pounded him in the gut. The agent staggered back, slipped on wet tiles, and plunged backward into the pool. The chair followed, splashing and crashing on top of him. Tom lost his footing and skidded to the floor, just in time to avoid the dart that shattered the wall tiles above his head. The shooter stood in the open door frame of the only emergency exit, the one that Tom had been hoping to use. Two other dark-clothed agents stood beside him, handcuffs ready. Tom scrambled for a few feet, unable to gain traction on the damp tiles. He ran toward the uninspiring gray door of the maintenance room. It might be a dead end, but he ran in anyway, slamming the door behind. He paused while his eyes adjusted to the dim light, his hand on the doorknob. Then his finger touched it, the small thumb knob which he turned to lock the door. Many round, lighted dials encased in the heating and filtration units delicately illuminated one side of the room, but shadows remained at the far end. Tom frantically scanned the dark room, looking for anything that he could use as a weapon. He took a few steps toward the shadows and studied the floor. It was an access panel, a door in the floor. He slid his hands over the rough metal surface before finding the flush, circular latch handle. Tom jerked upward on the heavy metal floor panel. He stuck a foot into the open crack and struggled to lift the thick door until it swung back and hit the wall with a loud clang. The room reverberated with the thunderous pounding of agents outside the maintenance door. A dart of fear paralyzed him. Get moving. Go. Go. Tom crouched in the darkness, peered into the darker hole, and saw a ladder. He jumped down the dark square as he grasped the rungs to halt his plummet. With hands and feet pressed on the outside edges of the ladder, he slid into the darkness, distance unknown. His burning hands gave out and released their grip. Tom fell backward unhindered, fortunately just a few feet, and jarred against a solid floor. He stood and made a dizzy stumble backward in the blackness. Tom wavered in the darkness, disoriented. Above, the agents burst through the maintenance door. A fuzzy shaft of light from the access panel turned the blackness to a dim gray. Tom stood in a small, hot utility room lined with strange shadows of mechanical equipment. An empty light socket protruded from the low 6-foot ceiling. The only exit, a narrow, cement-walled hallway with pipes and wires lining the ceiling. I'm a rat running through a maze. With the light behind him, he ran blindly into the dark corridor with hands extended. The shouts of his pursuers faded behind him. He had no idea how long the corridor might be until he smashed into something that knocked him to the floor, his head striking hard. Ears rang as fingers felt for damage. It hurt, but no blood. Sitting on the floor, thin light filtered past Tom and lit his obstruction, a dark wooden door. He could see a hairline of light under the door. It led outside. The agents had expected him to run into the empty pool room, but had they known about the access panel in the maintenance room? The corridor could be a cattle chute with a big cage outside that door surrounded by armed agents. He caught his breath and considered his two simple choices, the certainty of the past or the mystery of the future. He grasped the doorknob.
Well done. And obviously, psyops.
Dark Ops.
Black Ops.
Black Ops, okay. Very impressive. So, one of the things that's impressed me about you, for our listeners, what did we determine, 100 million? And it's
it's at least 100 million. It's only going up from there.
Right.
Like, you can watch the dial click.
Right. So, for those 101 million listeners that we now have, Bob is a member of my writers group, and one of the things that has impressed me about Bob is that most of us have been writing for years, and you just decided in the last 5 years?
Late in life,
Right.
I decided to start writing.
So
yes.
before we dig into that, tell us a little bit about your life as a magician. I think that's fascinating to people.
Yes, well, I always had an interest in magic ever since I was a child, but after I moved to Rochester and got unemployed, I decided that the next best option was to try to do magic, and it worked out pretty well. So for 20 years, magic was my full-time work, and I performed all over southern Minnesota, schools, for children's events, adult events, picnics, everything. Okay. And I performed a lot in restaurants doing tableside magic.
Right, that was almost your main thing, wasn't it?
It was a big part of it.
Right, and in fact, you are starting to do that now in the Twin Cities.
Yes, I am.
You started at El Toro. So you are going to perform one of your tricks, pre-date?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Yes, go ahead, and Michael gets to be the...
I get to be the stooge?
The stooge?
No, not the stooge. See, the stooge is a magic term. That means somebody who is in on the secret.
A
secret helper. You are considered the volunteer or the spectator.
Got it.
I have to tell a funny story. We went to, Bob invited me to a big event for magicians. There was just a convention here, what was it, a week and a half ago?
Yes.
And so a local magician, he calls himself the Twin Cities' busiest magician, Matt Dunn, hosted this party at his house, which is a whole nother story. It's a fantastic house. Mm-hmm. And he has a stage in the basement, and so there were, what would you say, 50, 60 magicians down there.
Wow.
And so one of them was doing his performance, and he asked, who in this audience is not a magician? It was not 101 million people who raised their hands, it was one. Me. So I ended up on stage. He was doing a rope trick. And at a certain point, I said, am I the only one in this room who does not know how this is done? 50, 60 people all laughed and said yes. That was a very unique experience. So we'll be posting actually a video of this pre-date trick. And go ahead and perform the trick.
Okay, wonderful. Well, what I've got right here, Michael, believe it or not, is a pocket calendar.
Okay.
And a pocket calendar. And I'll explain why this might be a pocket calendar in a moment. But first, since we're going to be doing a trick with a calendar, why don't you tell me about a date that has a personal significance to you?
All right, I'll just say October 19th because it's my birthday.
October 19th. Okay, wonderful. And are you revealing your age at that time or not? No, we're not going to. That will remain a secret.
Old, let's just say that.
That's okay. That will remain a secret. So October 19th is the date, and I want you to concentrate on that date because, as you can see, the cards are all mixed up. There's no order or pattern like that. And I'm just going to flip through the cards, and you're just going to say stop. Wherever you stop me, that'll be your card. We're going to take it out, but not look at it. So just say stop at this point, anytime.
Stop.
Right there. Okay. And we're not going to look at the card. We'll just set it there for now.
All right.
You could have stopped me at any one of those different cards. Now, I'm going to tell you why a deck of cards is like a pocket calendar, like a calendar. There's the number 52. That's made from every card in the deck because there's 52 cards in the deck, and there's 52 weeks in the year. Right?
Somebody thought that out.
It gets better.
It gets better.
There's 4 suits in the deck. There's 4 seasons in the year. Right? There are 13 ranks in the deck from ace through king, and there's 13 lunar cycles in the year. That is, every 28 days is a new moon. Right? Also, this is really interesting. If you were to add up the numbers of the ranks of all the cards, you get 364, add 1 for the joker, and you got 365, the number of days in a year.
Wow.
And, of course, people always say, but there's 2 jokers in the deck. And I respond with, well, yeah, that's because there's leap years sometimes. You need another joker. But it's almost like there's too many coincidences for it to be unplanned, right? Well, it gets better. So what I did here was in the calendar, there's a different card written on every day. There's no pattern or order. You could look through this. You wouldn't notice any similarity from month to month, except that within any given month, there's no cards repeated. Of course, cards will be repeated throughout the year because there's only 50 cards. But let's go to, what was the date you said?
October 19.
October 19. Could you take a look and tell me what card is on?
That is the Four of Hearts.
The Four of Hearts. And that's the only Four of Hearts on that page anywhere.
Yes, that is the only Four of Hearts on that page.
Turn over the card that you cut to.
That is the Four of Hearts.
Amazing.
These things creep me out.
Well, then I've done my job.
And that's just the start of some of the things I've seen. All right. So that is amazing. And like I said, I've seen some really, really amazing tricks that just blow my mind. So how long, what started you writing?
Writing, I would say that I am creative. Obviously, that I'm expressing myself through the magic and the creativity. At some point, I just came in my life where I decided I needed to write, express myself. It might have been motivated by depression. I don't know.
I think that's a common story for writers, for artists of all sorts. I think a lot of people really are driven to creativity by depression and misery.
But I hadn't really written any novels before, but I had written a few magic books.
Okay.
So I had that little bit of writing experience.
So you had that writing experience.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the Chrysalis Chronology series, summation of the whole series.
The 5-book series is about an evil company called Chrysalis Chronology International, and their goal, just like with any evil company, is to take over the world.
Of course.
And it was founded in the 1930s by some evil, greedy industrialists who decided that they wanted to become social engineers. But they, since they were near the end of their life, they had to have a way to manipulate the world beyond their control.
Right. Enjoy the fruits of their labor, too.
And it just so happens that one of their descendants stole some technology from the future, appeared in the past, and gave them the technology they needed in order to start to genetically alter people in the world.
So what was the inspiration? Margaret Anderson's book put the idea in my head of a tower that magically puts you in a different time. What put this idea into your head?
I'm not certain what it was. It might have been something about Highlander, about people living forever. But I just thought about the idea about what would happen if this happened to a young person. And I initially only intended to write just the first book, The Smart Kid. And as I was working through it, I started to ask myself, how would this person become this way, that they would not age? And I decided to think about the backstory on it. And that's what came up with the whole series for me. And I decided that was really the inspiration.
Right, and you were telling me how you came up with these 3 abilities. There are 3 separate abilities running throughout this series. How did you come up with them? Because they're unique, most of them.
Yeah, it is unique. I wanted to have some time travel abilities in the story, but I didn't want to have a time machine. I just don't think that that's as believable. I wanted to make it biologically based and therefore maybe more believable. And so if you wanted to send messages back to the past without a machine, one way to do that is if having a power called chronesthesia. And that's a real term, and that means mental time travel. So, which means that a person can think about a point in their past, they can send their consciousness back to that point in their past, and then start reliving their life at that point. So if they think back to when they were 10, then they're 10 again, but they brought all their memories from the future. And that means that a person could actually bring a message back in time. And if they then pass that message to another person who also had chronesthesia, and was an adult,
Right.
then he could think about his own past and bring it back. So like a baton being passed in a
Right.
race, the message would be passed backward in time.
And all of these three abilities all contribute to the founders being able to pass messages. So the second ability is?
Well, time extension or life extension.
Right.
Somebody being able to live for a long time, which means that then the message could also be passed all the way forward with one person.
And then the third ability?
The third ability is identity transference, which means that once a person injects their blood into another person, then they can transmit their consciousness into that person and operate them just like a puppet.
Fun.
Uh-huh.
We can all think of people.
Yeah.
Never mind.
We would like to do that.
So, Michael, what is beer number 2?
Okay, so beer number 2. What's the reading that this is going with? What's the title of this?
This is going with The Falls from the Time Leap.
Yep.
That is The Sound of Ice.
So yes, we're going to be a little unorthodox here, but the craft beer world right now is all about unorthodoxy. So the falls. As I was reading this section, the main image that stuck with me was icy Minnehaha Falls.
That's right,
and it is a constant in this, and I'm trying not to give spoilers here, but it is the constant. And so I wanted a beer that would kind of reflect icy Minnehaha Falls.
Okay.
So I was looking for the most refreshing beer I could find, and we're putting it on ice. We're doing this beer on the rocks. Like I said, we're being a little unorthodox. So this is from Dogfish Head Brewing in Delaware. It is called Quench. And this is kind of a mashup of multiple styles, German styles. You've got Kolsch, which is an old German ale from the city of Cologne. You've got Berliner Weiss, which is a sour beer from the city of Berlin. And you have Goza, which is a salted, coriander-infused sour beer from the city of Leipzig. And in addition, this is brewed with lime peel, lime juice, and black limes. So we've got this super refreshing, little bit tart beer served on ice to represent the ice that encases Minnehaha Falls in the winter. So cheers.
Yep, clink. That is nice and cold on ice.
It is.
It's a beer that I think can tolerate being on the rocks.
I think I'm tasting the lime. It's very strong.
Oh, definitely. The lime is
It's
strong in this.
tangy. Yep.
It's enhanced by, so it's got a lactic fermentation, so you get this lactic acid tart.
Wow. Yeah, you could almost sell me on this too.
Yeah, oh, you might like all three then.
That would be a first, wouldn't it? No, I have to say it kind of helps. It's a point in your favor. I've got a little bit of a sore throat, so anything nice and cold is going to
this would
taste
be good for you.
really good to me right now.
All right, so
go ahead.
Quench and the Falls.
The Falls from book number 2, The Time Leaper.
Yes, and just to clarify what's happening to set this up, Tim Long tries to save Reardon, who had been killed once already by Skolnick.
Some people just won't die.
So Tim's going back in time trying to stop that from happening. And there's also a reference to a woman named Cindy. Cindy was injured in an explosion caused by Skolnick. And that's all I need to know. Okay. Wednesday, December 1st, 2010, 9:40 p.m. I'm at the scene of the crime. So unreal. The police had estimated Reardon's time of death at 10 p.m. on Wednesday night. Tim doesn't want the killer seeing his Camaro, so he parks in the north lot and creeps through the trees until he can view the bridge crossing above the falls. The empty park is as dark and cold as a winter cemetery on a moonless night. The bare branches of the oak trees hardly block the few stars that find a path through the clouds. As Tim slinks toward the bridge, the steady roar of the falls seems to increase. The water flows rapidly for this time of year. By next month, it may be frozen like a photograph, the water hanging rigid from the top to the bottom of the 50-foot fall. But now it pounds with a ferocious, crushing force. Tim has a great desire to stand on the center of the bridge and watch the water spill into the circular splash pond below, but he fears being seen by the murderer. So he finds a tree surrounded by a few tall, naked bushes. He stoops, pressing his back against the tree, and slides down until he's hidden in the shrubbery. He can view the bridge, but is certain he will not be spotted by the killer. Tim scans the park. No one in sight. This is so weird. In the future, I'm paralyzed, immobile, helpless. But in my memory, I'm free to make life-changing choices. Tim considers the irony that, in a different timeline, Officer Grant had asked him where he'd been at the time of the murder. He had been alone in his apartment, but now he's at the scene of the crime. 2 different memories of the same night. After 25 minutes, Tim's legs cramp. He's about to stand and stretch when he sees a silhouette of a man walk onto the bridge from the left. It walks to the center and leans over the low rock railing, peering at the irresistible scene of the water splashing below. The silhouette definitely has a Reardon form with his dumpy hat and overcoat. Tim hasn't seen Reardon since he'd tried to attack him with a golf club. He frowns at the memory and works to control his anger. Tim, show some sympathy. He's about to die. Tim checks his watch. 10:08. Another dark figure scurries down the bridge from the right, holding a long object, a bat or heavy club. He moves with the stealth and speed of a lion on the attack. The Reardon shadow doesn't see the killer shadow approaching. Tim bolts upright and tries to push away from the tree, but his legs cramp with pain. He crashes down into a bush, groaning, and rubs furiously at the knotted calf muscles beneath his jeans. He limps toward the bridge, groaning with each step as he watches the grisly scene play out. He's going to be too late. The large, dark figure doesn't pause as it sneaks behind his victim and raises the bat. It swings downward like he's chopping wood. One heavy bash on top of the victim's head, and that's all it takes. The body slumps forward on the wide railing. It's a surreal scene of violence acted out in silhouette and silence, the only sound, the continuous splashing of water. Then Skolnick, Tim can see now that it's Skolnick, drops the bat and grabs the body below the waist and hauls it over the low wall where it falls out of sight. If the body is propelled by the river for the 6 feet to roll over the edge of the falls and splash into the deep basin below, Tim can't tell. He hears nothing but the incessant rush of water. Skolnick picks up the bat and tosses it over the edge. He leans forward, peering over the ledge. He jumps on top of the wide stone wall and stares over the top of the falls to the splash pool below as Tim runs up behind him. Tim is amazed at how close he's able to get without Skolnick hearing him. With each step, images of Cindy flash through his mind. Cindy's bloody face as she's carried away on a stretcher. Her twisted body covered by a collapsed ceiling. The heart-wrenching image of Cindy laying in bed kept alive by machines. The memories create a rush of adrenaline that overpowers him like a narcotic. His speed increases. As Tim steps up behind Skolnick, his mind screams, "This isn't the plan." Tim slams into Skolnick with the force of a linebacker, shoving against the tall murderer with all his weight. Skolnick never hears him coming. Skolnick flies through the air several feet and spills over the edge. He twists his body as he falls to the watery plateau and lands back first into the rapidly flowing creek. Tim almost plunges after him, but he's able to grasp the edge of the low wall and pull himself back from the brink at the last second. Skolnick's eyes are wide with shock. Their eyes meet for a second before the rapid water rolls Skolnick past the point of no return, plunging him 50 feet to the icy cold water. In that fleeting moment, before he disappears into the darkness, Skolnick grins at Tim. Tim's chest heaves from exertion and shock. He places his palms on the cold stone railing and leans forward, gazing into the splash pool. He sees neither body. Tim steps back and scans the empty park. "I can't believe it. Is that it? Are the threats over? It was only a 50-foot fall to the splash pond. It's unlikely that Skolnick is dead, unless he hit his head on a rock on the way down. With no protection, he'll be banged up, but alive and mad." How does revenge feel, Tim? Empty. There is no sense of victory. As Tim stares down at the tumbling water, one question floats to the surface of his consciousness. Why did Skolnick grin at me?
Ta-da.
Why?
And
Why indeed?
Right, he's just been
I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
And the reader will know it at this point in the story, because this came from Chapter 43 of The Time Leaper. Skolnick grins because, as a Time Leaper himself, he can just leap out of that body to a point earlier in his life. So it's pretty tough to kill a Time Leaper.
Mm-hmm.
I found it very interesting to drink this with those constant images of water and your explanation of why you paired it. It gave the scene a new twist, and I really was seeing the falls in the water
Awesome.
over and over in a way I didn't, because I've read both of these books straight through.
That is exactly how a pairing should work.
Isn't that great?
And the ice in the beer is like the rocks in the water.
Yeah. Well, some people who have read this book have accused Tim Long of not being terribly nice or likable at the beginning of the book.
Right.
Tell us one of the really obnoxious things he did.
Well,
I mean, my own character, Sean, is accused of the same thing. Go ahead.
something about having a superpower that Tim Long realizes is that having a power doesn't make you a better person. It only allows you to amplify whatever characteristics you've got in your life, good or bad. And once Tim Long discovers that he has this power and he can jump back in his time and repeat something, well, he makes a confession when he goes to his counselor, Reardon. He says to Reardon about his date the night before. He says, before I went on the date with Sasha, I had a giant piece of chocolate cake that I ate. And it was so good, I decided to enjoy it again. So he just did a time leap, went back and enjoyed the same piece of cake for the second time. So he'd enjoyed it twice without getting twice the calories, which was great. And Reardon, his counselor, said, well, that sounds harmless. And then Tim says, well, then I went out on my date with Sasha. And, well, I treated her like cake.
Not a very nice guy. And he does a lot of changing throughout the story. Why is it important for characters to change throughout a story?
Yes, there must be a story arc, with a character arc as part of the story. Tim Long starts out as kind of a selfish person, and as he progresses, he grows. I think that every story has got two parts, an inner story and an outer story. The outer story is the plot that you read, but the inner story, in this case, is how Tim Long changes and becomes a better person as he uses his powers. Finally, using them for good, not just for his own purposes.
Right. He does a lot of changing, and I think we're seeing some of that here because the whole thing about Cindy is that somebody is out to get Cindy. And so he keeps leaping back in time to try and save Cindy, as opposed to the very, very different way he used Sasha.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think you kind of see that learning process in what you just read when he looks over the bridge and says, how does revenge feel?
And there's nothing to it. Yes,
Right.
It doesn't feel good.
That jumped out at me, too.
Yeah.
And part of the reason, I mean, one of the things they say in writing fiction is that the character must either evolve or devolve.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we tend to write characters who evolve
Yes.
a whole lot more. And that's sort of the premise of my story, too. But I agree, inner story, outer story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to beer number 3.
All right, so what is the reading that this is going with?
This is going with my current work in process. It's the third book in the 5-book series. It's called The Proxy Agent.
All right, so this one, I am really going to try hard not to give spoilers to your reading here.
Okay.
But it's going to be difficult as I explain this beer and why I paired it. So this is, again, from Dogfish Head. We have 2 beers from the same brewery, Dogfish Head in Delaware. This is called Siracusa Nera. And this is another Imperial Stout. I don't know, your readings appeal to Imperial Stouts. But this one is a blend of stout and Syrah grape juice. So they're put together and fermented together and then aged in oak barrels. So the idea is, one, you've got the black of the goth girl.
Right.
And then the other is, there's kind of this is where I'm going to try not to give a spoiler, there's kind of a swap, a confusion that takes place at the end, a mix that takes place at the end, and that's what's going on in this beer. You've got this mix of beer and wine, and when you taste it, you'll think, is this beer? Is this wine? What exactly is this that we're drinking? So that's I was going for that to kind of hint at this swap, this mixing that takes place.
All right.
Good. Shall we try this?
All right, let's give it a try. Cheers.
Yeah, hey, anything that's a mix with wine, I think I'll like. You may be right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. This is it's kind of a trend. A lot of breweries are doing this now, using grape must in their beers and fermenting them together. Yeah, that's basically the
define
grape
must
juice.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's a wine term.
I thought it was like what you find under your bed when you haven't cleaned.
It's the results of pressing
grape must.
Pressing the grapes.
I learn something every day.
Interesting.
Okay, so reading number 3, The Proxy Agent is the third book in the series.
Yes.
And this concerns
Valentino Harris going out on a date with his girl Suzanne.
And let me just preface this. It's not exactly what it sounds like at first. So stick through to the end. Go ahead.
Okay. This is from the very first chapter of The Proxy Agent. Val glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 8. He returned the comic to his stash in the back closet, then grabbed a wet cloth from behind the counter and began to wipe off all the empty tables. If he could save Suzanne some of this work, then they could get down to business all the sooner. Shortly after 8, Val walked out the back door of the pizzeria with Suzanne and crossed the parking lot toward her house. She grabbed his hand and squeezed. "You were such a badass in school today. You sure ticked off Mr. Rodriguez. I'll bet you never get your comic back." Val just shook his head and watched his feet move him quickly to Suzanne's house. When they entered the front door and flipped on the lights, Suzanne headed upstairs to her bedroom. "Put on some music, and remember, don't take any beers, because my dad counts them." She scurried up the steps. Val slid open the large phonograph cabinet and turned on the radio. He twisted the dial until he heard the replacements playing "I'll Be You." He slipped his shoes off and stretched out on the soft brown couch. His body sank into it. Nice. Suzanne appeared at the bottom of the steps. She'd changed out of her pizzeria shirt and was wearing jeans and a blue button-down blouse. The top 2 buttons were undone. Nicer. They'd been friends since their sophomore year. In this, their senior year, they'd become more serious. Val hadn't really been interested in her until she started dressing like a goth child. Val never considered himself goth, but apparently he seemed to have the right temperament because she latched onto him this year and hasn't let go. He knew that they made an impression, not necessarily a positive one, a witch-like wraith with an unsmiling escort on her arm. But that was part of the appeal, making a negative impression. She slid next to him. They both sank into the couch, their bodies naturally tipping toward each other. Val looked away for 5 seconds. He counted them. Can't appear too into this. She rested a hand on his knee. Val turned toward her, his face as serious as ever, and reached a hand to her hair, twisting strands around his fingers. He held tight. Now he controlled her. He didn't want to hurt her. He was pretty sure he wasn't tugging at her hair, but he could move her head, controlling it like a horse's bridle. She didn't give any indication that it bothered her. He knew she was expecting it. Ever so slowly, he directed her head toward his and inhaled as he smelled strawberries. He directed her mouth upward slightly until it was an inch from his. He waited for another second. A question showed in her eyes. That was what he'd been waiting for. He drew her toward him and kissed her. When she kissed him back and her mouth seemed to relax, he slowly released her hair. Val knew what she wanted, not just to be kissed by someone eager, gawky teenager. No, she wanted to be kissed by someone who demanded her respect. After several more minutes and kisses, she pulled back. "Do you want to do it now?" Val gave one nod, then leaned into Suzanne. She placed her hand on his mouth. "Don't bite my lip this time because it leaves a mark. I brought a pin." She removed the butterfly brooch pinned to her collar. She pushed the sharp point near Val's face, apparently to get a reaction out of him. Val didn't move, the pin an inch from his eye. She smirked. "Hold up your finger." He obeyed, presenting his middle finger toward her. She shook her head. "You wish." She stabbed the needle into the fleshy front of his finger. It began to bleed. Val didn't flinch. She raised her left hand, palm up. Val grabbed her right hand and eased the butterfly brooch into his hand. "Please, let me." She released the pin and extended her forefinger. Val grabbed her middle finger and looked into her eyes. She nodded. He poked her finger gently. A drop of blood appeared. They held their fingers only an inch apart. Suzanne looked into Val's eyes. Val could feel her demanding his attention with her steady gaze. He gave her his full attention. "Val, I want you inside me, but promise you won't undress me." Her voice was a whisper. Val whispered back, "You like this because you're giving up complete control, so why ruin it with promises? Be prepared to take the full risk." Before she could open her mouth to respond, Val pressed their bloody fingers together. Suzanne wrapped the fingers of her right hand around their joined fingers. Val did the same. He held that pose for 10 seconds, then 20. He could feel it happening. He felt dizzy and released his grip. He began to fall backward toward the armrest. He felt her arm around his neck, gently easing him down. It felt as if his head was spinning, or as if the room was spinning inside his head. Then he felt like he was falling down and down. If he jumped out of an airplane, he might have had a similar sensation. He even seemed to see the illuminated city below him, but Val knew it wasn't a city. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. A tangle of neurons looked just like illuminated roads from a mile in the sky, probably. Then he fell into it, gently. Then there's a short scene break, and it continues. I slowly open my eyes. That usually helps to reduce the extreme sense of vertigo and stomach-churning uneasiness. I blink. My eyes open completely. I see my body resting on the couch below me. I pull my arm, or would that be Suzanne's arm, out from behind his neck and let his head rest gently on the couch. I look so innocent when I'm asleep. I stare at my body from Suzanne's brown eyes.
Very unique.
That was a surprise when I read this.
Yes.
That ending.
You weren't expecting that, were
And
you?
even as it was getting to it, up until that last line, I was not entirely clear what was happening.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah.
And that's the way a story and a magic trick should be.
Yes.
With
Right.
a twist at the end.
Which leads us to this question. You have explained to me that you have learned things about writing from your life as a magician. And as I said earlier, long ago I had a friend who said writing advice is throw away your first million words. And you've really come to writing fairly recently, but you said you've learned things about writing from your life as a magician. And one of these things is that there are only so many plots in writing. You know, the three basic plots: man against man, man against self, man against nature. Other lists are 7 basic plots, 36 plots, and so on. And in the world of tricks and illusions, which I have learned are different things, there are only 7 plots in magic. What are they? And how does that affect your writing? So, big question there.
I'll see if I can remember these. The 7 basic magic tricks are production. That's making something appear out of nowhere, like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Vanish, of course, the opposite of that. Then there's transposition, which is one object moving from one location to another without the space in between. It just appears. Basically, you could say that it's a vanish combined with reduction. Then there's also what's known as a transformation. One thing changes into another. Woman changed into a tiger, something like that. There's also what is known as invulnerability. This would be a trick like cutting a woman in half. Cut her in half and she's not harmed. It would also be like a trick where a magician pulls a ring through a string. Neither the ring or the string is harmed. There's also another one that's known as levitation or animation. That would be like if you see a magician floating a woman on stage and he passes the hoop over her to show that she's not supported in any way. And then there's also mental tricks, like predictions or telepathy, knowing what somebody is thinking. And those are the main 7 categories.
And so how would you say that you took some of these ideas and applied them to writing this idea of only so many plots? What plot is Val's story?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but plots, so Val's, of course, can transmit his identity into another body. Mm-hmm. So that would be transposition. Okay. Jumping from one cabinet to another, basically.
Right. And he uses that, and he's tempted to use it. What is the temptation to Val? We see an obvious temptation in this scene.
Yes.
But
right.
There are some new ones as he gets pulled into this company.
Well, it's another one of these stories where you've got a power, and how does the person decide to use it? And of course, the company that he's going to work for, Chrysalis Chronology, has evil goals in mind, because if you can jump into somebody else's body and make them do whatever you want, that gives you an awful lot of power. So he's hired by the company to do that. But on a personal level, he is also tempted to do that sometimes for his own gain. Like, for example, when he was in high school and he didn't like the history teacher for giving him an F and showing everybody that he got a bad grade, he just inhabited the teacher one day and threw a pizza party using the teacher's credit card.
But it gets a lot worse, and the temptations get much bigger as Chrysalis Chronology offers him quite a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so, just like Tim Long, it does end up being a story of growth. And now I've, because we're listening to this in Night Riders, I've only heard, halfway through?
Halfway through, yes.
Right. So I'm interested to know when he finally draws the line and what the final straw is. And I think that's an interesting question for all of us in our own lives. You know, when do you finally say enough?
Yes.
I'm going to sacrifice what I could have, or I'm going to risk what I do have.
And about that, even though these could be considered science fiction stories, my goal has always to make them human stories. It's not really about the science that these people have got the powers. It's about how real humans respond when they've got the powers. And that's something that anybody can relate to, even if they don't like science fiction.
Even within our lives, because we all face the same questions, even if we can't put ourselves in someone else's body. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think at this point we are ready to wrap up.
We are.
Some links. And so, Bob, where can people find you? I think you have at least 2 websites.
Well, the magic website is bobmillermagic.com, and that will list my upcoming shows, my regular gigs. And the author website is bobmillerauthor.com.
Very good. Michael, where can we find you?
You can find me at aperfectpint.net and as A Perfect Pint on all of the socials.
And we're also at Books and Brews.
Booksandbrews.net and on Instagram at Book and Brews. So
just
book,
the letter N.
N. Brews.
And you can find me at a number of places. BluebellsChronicles.com is my main site. I'm at Twitter under Laura Vosika, Facebook laura.vosika.author. I'm on Instagram, and I think it's Laura_Vosika. I don't go on in. Well, yeah, you kind of created a monster, but I haven't had much to post lately. So,
do you want to tell us about any events you have coming up?
Yes, currently I just got a gig at El Toro restaurant in Champlin. So every Friday I'll be performing tableside magic and balloon animals from 6 to 8 p.m.
And I believe we'll be filming another trick that you're doing to
Great.
put up.
Yes.
So, Michael, do you have any upcoming events? Your 3 weeks?
I do not have
crazy?
any public events. All my events are private.
Okay. I have the book launch of Startled by Joy. I edited this. It's an anthology of new poetry in traditional and classical forms for Gabriel's Horn. And we are having our book launch this coming Sunday, July 7th at Next Chapter Booksellers, 38 South Snelling Avenue, St. Paul. We are featuring Thomas R. Smith and a number of other poets. And there is music. There is free wine. Woohoo! I'm sure that will attract at least 75 million of our listeners from all corners
You're
of the
going to
world.
need a bigger space.
Well, we'll spill out into the street. It'll be a street party. Not only free wine, but hors d'oeuvres.
Ooh.
Yeah, and hopefully I spelled that right on the website. And August 11th at Egg Roll Queen Cafe in Falcon Heights, 5:30 to 7:30. We also have some of our poets reading. And I should mention July 7th is 2 to 3:30. So, and our upcoming guest?
We've got next month, Catherine Kaiser. She's the author of 2 books of poetry, Dark Lake and Pretend the World, and the editor of Writing Shotgun, Women Write About Their Mothers. She's received fellowships from the Banfield Locke Center for the Arts, Minnesota State Arts Board, National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Anderson Center for Interdisciplinary Studies. Kaiser recently served on the board of directors for the Association of Writers and Writing Programs and Teachers at Anoka Ramsey Community College and the Loft Literary Center, and lives with her family in St. Paul.
And so that is coming up next month. Thank you very much, Bob, for being with us today.
Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you for inviting me.
I would make a terrible pun about it's been magical, but I'm sure you've heard that like 5 million times.
And this has been episode 3 of the Books and Brews podcast. Thanks for tuning in.